The purpose of our wanting to call this news conference is one that as a result of one of the investigations that we've been doing, we ended up on Wednesday night actually connecting a series of investigations that were likely committed by the same suspect. And based on that information, we then started looking at the investigations more, that there was a series of incidents that were being done by the same perpetrator. And as a result of that, the investigators begin to aggressively work on identifying the suspect on Thursday, and ended up we were able to bring him into custody Thursday evening. One of the main purposes of this press conference is that we believe that there's other victims out there. We believe that this suspect had committed this crime over a period of months, and as a result of that, there are victims that probably did not report to the police department yet. And so it's imperative that we would like those victims to come forward. We certainly understand that it's a difficult decision with victims to want to come forward and enter the process of having to report such a terrible thing that might have happened to them. But it's really important that we can use that information and bring resolution to their cases, and do that through the process of our investigations and then through the judicial process itself. Now, this particular investigation, as I said, it is a series of investigations that were independent. And on Wednesday, after another victim came forward, we started to see patterns that existed in this particular case with other cases that we're investigating. And so that evening we had a unit meeting, and we then began a timeline to lay out all the evidence that was in these other investigations. And as a result, we were able to see patterns that emerged. Now, the way we do our investigative process, we have a collaborative effort. We work with a group, a team, if you would say, with our district attorney, with Providence. We have our sexual assault nurse examiners there, STAR with their advocacy, and that whole group works together with our agency to be able to resolve and investigate these incidents. Now, as a result of that, even information comes forward from STAR that we're able to assist in identifying this suspect on Thursday, and that led to his arrest Thursday evening. And so with that, the main emphasis, again, I want to say is that the victims of this crime, we believe there's more out there, and we would encourage them to be able to step forward. STAR has a crisis line, and you can contact them directly, or they can contact the Anchorage Police Department and report it directly. And so with that, I will leave it open for some questions that you might have regarding this.
Why wasn't the public notified sooner that there was a serial rapist? I mean, it seems like all of those women that were coming forward in the same description.
No, and that's not actually the case. What happens is that in any serial crime, what you have is you have a fact set that never clearly identifies itself early. And so what you do is you have these crimes that are reported, and there are similarities in some of the cases, but they're rarely exact. And so it usually takes over time till that pattern is actually recognized. And in this case, there's a lot of descriptions that are vague, don't necessarily match that the specific. You may have the description of an Asian male, but there are a number of cases that we investigate, and it takes time for that fact set to actually develop. And with any serial case, that's what usually happens. In this particular case, our last incident that was reported to our SART center, because of a specific MO that was being used on one or two other cases, that's when the two detectives that were working these cases recognized that we may have a series here. That's when we sat down, and what we do is a timeline. We actually analyze and do a flow chart to look at the evidence to see if in fact the evidence does match up to the other cases. As I said, it's never a clear blinding light rule that you see this pattern that emerges, that it's always this. There's a series of stuff, and when you start putting those pieces together, that's when you actually recognize that you have it. And from that time, which was Wednesday, to the time we arrested him, there was some things that were critical as far as the evidence that we were pursuing, and so it wasn't appropriate at that point in time to be able to do that.
When did you figure out it was Mr. Lee?
Pardon me?
When did you figure out that Mr. Lee was your
I believe that would have been around Wednesday night or Thursday morning, and I'm not sure. I can get the detectives.
Documents say that there was a photographic photo lineup that basically said around the time of, during the July 12th incident of victim MC. So when did you determine that?
The exact time that they did the lineup, I'm not certain of, but I still think it was around Wednesday or Thursday. That particular victim might be associated with a crime that occurred back in there. Like I said, I think, have identified at least 4 to 5 cases actively that we're working that we can connect to Mr. Lee. And as I said, we believe that there's probably other victims out there that have not reported yet.
And this said that the victims were vulnerable like leaving bars downtown? Were they homeless women?
No, I think and without getting into specifics about each of the victims in this case, what I would tell you is that when we talk about vulnerable victims, a lot of times women are vulnerable just by the nature of being out and alone. Oftentimes they take rides. People offer them rides and they take rides from people, and then they're in a position where then they are basically trapped by somebody. And so when we speak about vulnerability, alcohol may be certainly something that's a factor, but it's oftentimes you'll see where they have a connection where the suspect offers them generosity with a ride or something along those lines.
So he didn't know his victims?
No, we don't believe that he had any social connection to the victims in this case, no.
Do you believe he perpetrated all of these crimes alone? I know it states that he assaulted someone in a residence of one of his relatives.
What we believe right now, based on our investigation, and it's still ongoing, but we believe that he acted alone and he was doing this on his own.
Do you know how long he's been in prison?
I don't. I know that I think he's been born here. He may have left the state for a period of time and came back, but I don't know the exact time frames and parameters that he was, resident, not a resident, back to being a resident.
Why is bail been set? Why can he post to bail and be back out in the community?
Say that again about bail?
Bail has been set?
Yes.
So he can be released back out into the community?
Well, part of our judicial process is that we have a process to go through, and one of those things that's mandated is that bail is set. I think bail is set in this case, but it's set very high, and it's very doubtful that he'll be able to rise to that monetary threshold to be able to get bail. And I think there's some third-party restrictions that are in place, but that's a constitutional right that everybody has, and so bail is part of our judicial system, so that's part of the process. It's not unusual.
Was he employed here in Anchorage?
I don't know the answer to that.
Do you suspect there was victims before this 5-week period
Yes.
in similar situations, or?
Likely in similar situations where they encountered him in a chance encounter, and that contact resulted them being sexually assaulted.
Was there a time frame when he was doing this, evening, afternoon?
I know a lot of the cases were usually late evening into early morning hours, but that's not to say that some of these couldn't have occurred during other times of the day.
The reason I asked that is there's 20 attempted one on one day, and the same day later on, or whatever, there was actually, you guys.
Perpetrated one.
Perpetrated, yes.
Yeah, so I would say that he's not limited to a particular time frame. My understanding of the vast majority of these are occurring later at night, earlier in the morning.
It was right in the South Anchorage with a parking lot, all houses. I know one was particularly a house.
Where the actual initial contact between the victim and the suspects were occurring and where the assaults were occurring weren't always the same location. They were often a different location.
And then once he was, and the victim were done, were all the victims, did they just flee? Did he release them?
Some fled, some were able to be released, and some got away from him, and then others were released after the assault.
And did you guys get any of the DNA results back yet?
It would be way too early in the investigation, and I really wouldn't discuss elements specifically relating to evidence we're not going to really go over and discuss in detail.
And the victims that fled or got away, was that from his car or his residence?
I wouldn't say anything specific. I would say that one of them, I believe, fled from a vehicle. As far as ownership of the vehicle and that, we're not at that point to really confirm anything as far as that goes. But I believe one of them was able to get away from a vehicle.
Did you guys have any issues arresting him?
Pardon me?
Did you guys have any issues arresting him?
I believe that there was some information that he initially tried to flee because we used some of our surveillance units. As I said, the minute we were able to identify him, we had critical evidence that we needed to identify and gather, and so we utilized members of our vice unit to be able to establish surveillance and be able to locate him in an undercover capacity. And I think that once we took the overt actions to go ahead and take him into custody, there might have been a little bit resistance where he attempted to flee from our patrol officers, but that was short-lived, and that he was taken into custody a short distance, or within close proximity where the attempt was.
In many of these instances, he threatened the victim's lives, and we know that he used a stun gun in some of these circumstances. With the escalation of violence that often happens with violent crimes or crimes of this nature, are you trying to look and connect any missing persons cases, or are we too early in the investigation?
What I would say is that, when you have a series, there's nothing to indicate other than what we have in our investigation. As I said, it's still ongoing and it's in its early stages. So completely this guy's psychological profile, we don't know what it appears to us, what we have is we have a serial rapist here that was perpetrating bystanders that he happened to encounter, women that he happened to encounter by chance. These weren't people that he had interaction with, a social relationship with, or anything like that. These were random victims that he saw an opportunity, and then he seized that opportunity. So there was plan, but it don't go beyond that. And I wouldn't say that just because he's a rapist would lead him to do other things. Could, but not always. And so what our evidence is and our investigation is focused on, and we don't have any information to the contrary, that this is a series of sexual assaults that this particular suspect was committing, and they were perpetrated against women that he happened to encounter, more so by chance than actually methodically planning it per se, or having any kind of social interaction or contact with them.
It also looks like you spent some time in Washington as a resident there. Are you guys working with like Washington police?
We will be, and I believe that it was maybe living in Seattle or something like that, but we will certainly look at that, and that will be one piece of the investigation. Anything else?
Is there any sort of lesson that you think the public might be able to take away from what was happening? I know you're renting cars with strangers, but...
No, and I mean, those are the obvious, and I think that we become trusting. You know, women are often very vulnerable. They're at a position where people prey on them, and that's unfortunate. But that's something that women often have to live with, and so being careful is what we would obviously hope that they do, but it's unfortunate that that has to occur. The other thing that I would say is that I would encourage, and I know this is a difficult thing for women to come forward, because the mere fact of being sexually assaulted is such, it affects people on so many different levels. And then the fact that the challenge is having to bring that forward to the police and know the judicial process that you got to go through, that's challenging at best. And so the only thing that I can say, that's a personal decision, but if they feel that desire, we would encourage them to do it early, because that allows us to be able to gather as much evidence as soon as possible, so that we can be able to successfully gather the evidence and be able to present it to the district attorney's office so that they could be successful in prosecution.
Had he not been arrested, do you think he would have stopped?
I don't know I'm pretty confident that he would have continued his pattern. There was no indication that he was going to stop. And that's why I say stepping forward sometimes is able to stop future types of crimes and future victims from this one particular person. Because what I do know is that he has done multiple victims, and there are still more out there that have not reported yet. So I have no reason to believe that he would have stopped.
Is it fair to call him a serial rapist?
Well, I mean, a serial, you define him, basically it's a pattern of the same sequence of events that he's using, and he's going after multiple victims using this MO. So I would say that he's a serial rapist in that sense.
And he's admitted to it.
We don't really, and I get that I can't discuss specifics as far as evidence and things of that nature, because we have a whole process that we got to go through with regards to court. So our investigation has determined what I've been able to tell you, but getting into the specifics as to what evidence we have to show that, that's something that will come forward in the court process. The only thing that I would just emphasize is what you see here in Anchorage, we have a really contemporary process of being able to address sexual violence. You know, with the multidisciplinary approach that we use, working with the forensic nurse examiners with Providence, our investigative unit, our district attorney's unit that prosecutes these cases, the advocacy group with STAR that works to advocate these victims. We all work closely together trying to make this scourge go away as best we can. But I just want to emphasize that this process does work, and it's effective for the victims as best we can to be able to investigate these effectively and understand what a victim goes through and be able to take them through that process as gently as possible. So just emphasize that.
Do you have, I know you can't give specifics, but do you have like a time range of, that you think this has been going on beyond the 5 weeks? I mean, are you looking for people to come forward from years ago?
What I can tell you is that I would say at least the information we have goes back months. And could it go beyond that? Absolutely. But the information that we have right now goes back months. And so that's the time frame. But that's not to say that a few months ago he just started, so we rarely catch them on the first time around. But the reality is that there's other victims out there that we're fairly certain of that, and we would encourage them to come forward. And as I said, STAR, they can contact the crisis line at STAR, and they will help them go through this process and make it much more comfortable for them if they don't want to contact the police department directly.
How often does the special Special Victims Unit deal with serial rapists?
Well, I would say the serial rapists in any part of the country, they're not the norm. You know, in fact, you know, random sexual assaults on randomly targeted victims are the exception, not the norm in any community, not just here in Anchorage, but anywhere. So it's not something that happens every day. A lot of sexual assaults that occur, they occur between people that know each other, and there's a relationship or connection there. And the woman is victimized into circumstances in which she knows who the perpetrator is. But and that's unfortunate. But this is a rare, I won't say that it's a rarity, but it's not the norm. It is the bush jumper sexual assault, the stranger abduction kind of sexual assault are not the norm in this community nor any other community. They're the exception. And so when we see them, we obviously try to investigate them aggressively, but no more aggressively than we would investigate the other types of crimes. Just being able to identify that perpetrator and get him off the street because the nature of his victims are random, and there can be anybody in the community.
Actually, the fact that they're random, I mean, that's kind of rare. Doesn't it seem like more times than not the victim knows?
Yes, and that's what I was trying to say, that most sexual assaults that occur, they occur between people that know each other, where there is some kind of social connection. And so when you see this type, I would say you put these in the 10% category, but that's nationwide. It's not just here. These are typically the stranger type of sexual assault is what the public mostly thinks about. And that's unfortunate because the reality is a lot of people that sexually assault women, they know each other. And so we tend to think of it in one category when we maybe need to think a little broader because these are not the norm.
Is there a pattern between like the women, like a certain age range? I mean, I know that most of them like you're intoxicated or vulnerable, but is there like an age range or?
Well, I would say that we didn't look at any victimology to give you a specific to say that particular aspect. Did he have a unique age set that he was looking at? So I would say we didn't look at that, so I couldn't intelligently answer that one way or another. And I would emphasize that intoxication may be a factor, but it's not the only factor in this particular case. As I said, just, you know, women are oftentimes vulnerable, and in this case, someone reaches out and uses their charm or whatnot to be able to lure them into a position where then they can take control of the situation and assault them, and that's what you have happening here.
What part of town did he live in?
Did he live in? I don't know his address. I'm not certain. So I want to say, Floyd, do you know? And without an address, just in general area of town.
It appears he was living in a number of locations.
Okay.
He didn't have a fixed address.
And have there been serial rapists in Anchorage before?
Oh, I'm sure that we've had patterned rapists in the community before, yes.
Can you think of?
I just took over command of this unit, so it would be premature for me to just spout one off without knowing the facts.
Excuse me, Lieutenant, I believe Detective Dupuy can talk about it.
Sure.
Great.
Come on up.
Actually, had several serial rapists within Anchorage. One of the most common ones that most people know is
Come on up.
Anthony Rollins. He was a serial rapist. And we also had Richard Dorsey, who was arrested here recently, a year or 2 years ago, and he was convicted as well. And those are just the most recent ones that I can think of.
Can you give us some cross streets or intersections as to about where some of these assaults happened?
I don't know, so I don't know that I want to go into the locations of these scenes and stuff like that. That I would just say that a lot of the victims were in areas where it would not be uncommon to be walking on foot, and that's where these encounters occurred with the suspect. And the suspect took them to locations that were more isolated and away from the public eye, if you would, where he was able to assault the women.
Can you say a neighborhood?
It varies. It's not one particular neighborhood. I just think that, you know, the unique thing about Anchorage is you can go here and you can have a densely populated area and you can have a very affluent neighborhood and they match up to each other. And you can have green belts right next to very populated areas. So just finding areas of seclusion where it's out of the public eye is oftentimes what is normal in these cases, and that was consistent in this case also. Okay, thank you very much.